Welcome back, everyone. Tonight I've brought you 3 bone-chilling true horror stories pulled straight from the darkest corners of America. These are the kinds of stories that will definitely keep you up at night. So turn off the lights, plug in your headphones, and get comfortable. Let's dive straight into it. There are places in the North Maine woods that aren't on any map. Vast, dense stretches of pine and spruce where the canopy is so thick the sun barely touches the forest floor, even at half noon. It's the kind of wilderness that feels ancient, indifferent, and completely cut off from civilization. And deep within this isolation sits a nameless, century-old log cabin, weather-beaten, rotting, and long forgotten. Daniel wasn't looking for trouble, he was looking for quiet. A true crime author from Boston, suffering from severe writer's block, he needed a place to clear his head and finish his next book. When he found the cabin listed online for dirt cheap, he jumped at the chance. He packed his laptop, a few boxes of groceries, and drove up north. He wanted isolation. He didn't realize that some isolations are actually traps. The first day was spent just making the place livable. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, damp wood, and old secrets. In the corner of the living room sat an antique wooden rocking chair, which Daniel immediately pushed against the far wall to make room for his desk. By 10 p.m., a cold, relentless Maine rain started beating against the roof. The temperature plummeted, bringing in that biting, bone-chilling New England cold. Sitting by the stone fireplace with a steaming mug of black coffee, Daniel looked out the window. It was pitch black. The only shape he could make out was the silhouette of pine branches clawing against the glass in the wind. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Daniel chuckled to himself, trying to shake off a sudden unease. Just the wind, he muttered. He turned off the lights and went to bed. Dead on 3 o'clock, Daniel's eyes snapped open. He hadn't woken up from a nightmare. He woke up because of the cold. The fire in the hearth was still smoldering, but the air in the bedroom was so freezing he could see his own breath pluming in the dark. He pulled the wool blanket tighter around his shoulders, and that's when a heavy, suffocating feeling settled over him. He wasn't alone. The room smelled rancid all of a sudden, a sickening mix of wet earth, copper, and rotting meat. He sat up, his heart hammering against his ribs, and then, breaking the silence of the cabin, came a sound from the living room. It was the rhythmic sound of a rocking chair. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, turned on the flashlight, and slowly stepped out of bed. He guided the beam of light toward the living room, panning across the dusty floor. The light stopped. The heavy oak rocking chair, the one he had shoved firmly into the corner hours ago, was now sitting dead center in the middle of the room. And it was rocking, violently, as if someone had just abruptly jumped out of it. The air became completely still. Daniel's breath hitched. Is someone there?" he called out, his voice cracking. He tried to tell himself it was a draft, but the windows were locked tight. Summoning every ounce of courage, he walked over and placed a trembling hand on the back of the chair. It stopped moving. The cabin fell into a dead, unnatural silence. Daniel let out a shaky breath, turning around to head back to his room. He didn't even make one step. Right against his ear, so close he could feel a freezing, dead breath on his neck, a raspy, hollow voice whispered, "You're sitting in my spot, Daniel." Daniel stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and crashing onto the floor. His heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst through his chest. How did it know his name? There was no way anyone else was out here. Panic took over. He didn't care about his book, his laptop, or his pride. He needed to get to his truck and drive until he hit a highway. He scrambled to his feet, sprinted to the front door, and grabbed the heavy brass handle. He threw his weight against it. It didn't budge. He pulled, twisted, and kicked the wood, but the door was sealed shut, as if someone or something was holding it from the outside with impossible strength. "Hey, let me out! Help!" he screamed, pounding his fists against the wood, but his voice was swallowed by the endless Maine wilderness. Suddenly, the power cut out. The faint embers in the fireplace died instantly. The cabin was plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness. The only illumination was the fading glow of his phone screen. Daniel looked down. The battery icon flashed red, 1%, and then the screen went completely black. Total darkness. He was blind. He backed up until his spine hit the log wall, sliding down to the floor, breathing heavily. Thump, 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 thump. His own pulse was deafening. And then a new sound began. It came from directly beneath him. The scratching moved. It traveled up the floorboards, transitioned to the logs of the wall right next to him, and moved upward. Whatever it was moving on 4 legs, scaling the wall like an oversized insect, heading straight for the ceiling. Daniel buried his face in his knees, covering his ears, weeping silently. He could hear it now, something heavy, unnatural, crawling upside down across the ceiling, directly over his head. Then something cold and viscous dripped onto his forehead. He wiped it away with a trembling hand and brought it to his nose. The copper, metallic stench of fresh blood filled his senses. He couldn't take the darkness anymore. Desperate for a sliver of light, he fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small box of matches he'd picked up at a gas station. With shaking fingers, he struck a match. The small amber flame flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Daniel slowly tilted his head upward to see where the dripping was coming from, and his mind fractured. Hanging upside down from the rafters, mere inches from his face, was a creature. Its body was emaciated, a skeletal frame covered in ash-gray, decaying skin. Long, spindly arms ended in black, jagged talons dug deep into the wooden beams. But it was the face that paralyzed him. It had no eyes, just 2 hollow, pitch-black sockets weeping a dark fluid. And its mouth was slit from ear to ear, peeled back into a sickening, impossibly wide grin of razor-sharp teeth. It was staring right at him. The creature tilted its head, its jaw unhinging further, savoring his terror. The match burned down to Daniel's fingers. He gasped, dropping it. Darkness reclaimed the room. "Please," Daniel sobbed, pressing himself as hard as he could against the wall. "Please just let me go." From the blackness above, a chorus of voices answered him. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It sounded like a dozen distorted, overlapping whispers echoing all at once. No one leaves the Black Wood, Daniel. You belong to the woods now. The storm roared into the cabin, rain spraying across the floorboards. The sudden rush of wind gave Daniel a fleeting instinct to survive. He threw himself forward, scrambling through the doorway on all fours, and burst out into the torrential rain. He didn't look back. He ran blindly into the woods, tearing through the thick underbrush, his bare feet cutting open on jagged rocks and briars. Behind him, above the howling wind and crashing thunder, he heard it. The thing was pursuing him. It was incredibly fast, bounding through the dark forest like a predatory beast closing in on its prey. Daniel ran faster, his lungs burning, his vision blurred by rain and tears. The wilderness felt alive, a malicious entity closing its jaws around him. Suddenly, his foot caught on a thick pine root. He flew forward, slamming violently into the mud. He tried to scramble back up, but a white-hot agony shot through his right leg. His ankle was badly broken. He rolled onto his back, dragging himself backward through the mud using his elbows. He stopped. Emerging from the shadow of the pines, two hollow black voids focused on him. A long grey arm stretched out from the darkness, its talons glistening in the moonlight. Daniel looked up at the stormy sky and let out one final blood-curdling scream. "Help me!" But the scream was instantly drowned out by the thunder, swallowed entirely by the indifferent expanse of the Maine woods.
The next morning, the Maine State Police located Daniel's truck parked outside the isolated cabin after his editor reported him missing. Inside the cabin, everything was untouched. His laptop was open on the desk, his clothes neatly packed. The only anomaly was the antique rocking chair, standing perfectly in the center of the room, gently swaying back and forth. A search party combed the dense backcountry for days. They never found Daniel. The only trace of the author was his torn, blood-soaked flannel jacket, found pressed deep into the mud about a mile into the thicket. And next to the jacket, stamped deep into the earth, were a set of human footprints, abruptly ending where a massive four-legged set of claw marks tore into the ground. The Blackwood cabin still stands today, buried deep in the heart of Maine, and locals say that if you happen to hike too far off the trail on a stormy night, you can still hear a faint, desperate voice echoing through the pines, whispering for help. But the woods never answer. They only take.
The next story. The Appalachian Trail in Virginia is beautiful. Thousands of people hike it every year without a hitch. But there are deeper, unmapped sections of those woods where the canopy chokes out the sun and the silence gets a little too heavy. In October of 2014, my buddy Chris and I found out exactly what hides in that silence. It's taken me 12 years to finally talk about this publicly. The police long ago marked the case as a missing persons case and closed the file. But I know what happened out there, and I know Chris didn't just get lost. It was supposed to be a standard 3-day backpacking trip through a rugged, off-trail section of Shenandoah. Chris brought along his high-end GoPro, planning to vlog the whole trip for his channel. The first 2 days were perfect: vibrant autumn foliage, clear blue skies, crisp mountain air. The nightmare started on the third afternoon. We tried to take a shortcut using an old, overgrown logging path. By the time we realized the trail had completely vanished into the thicket, the sun was dropping fast. If you've ever been in the mountains, you know dusk doesn't linger, it just plummets into pitch black. Our GPS was dead, and we had zero cell service. With no other choice, we set up our tent beneath a massive, rotting pine. We decided against lighting a campfire to avoid drawing any black bears or coyotes to our position. We ate some cold rations, crawled into our sleeping bags, and tried to sleep. Outside, it was dead quiet and freezing. At around 1:15 a.m., the absolute stillness of the forest shattered.
Something was moving right outside the tent. My first instinct was a bear. I reached over in the dark, grabbed Chris's shoulder and whispered, "Chris, wake up. There's something outside." Chris blinked awake, instinctively reaching for his GoPro and turning it on. The tiny red recording light cast a faint, eerie crimson glow inside the tent. We held our breath, listening. The footsteps outside didn't belong to an animal. It was a heavy, deliberate, two-legged stride, a bipedal cadence. Someone was walking in a slow, perfect circle around our tent. But here's the detail that made my stomach drop. It was pitch black outside, but this person wasn't using a flashlight. They were navigating the dense, treacherous terrain flawlessly in total darkness. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, right in front of the tent-zipped door. There was only an inch of nylon separating us from whatever was standing out there. The thing was so close, I could hear its breath filtering through the fabric. Heavy, wet, ragged. Someone was tapping on the tent with a fingernail, testing the tension, checking to see if we were awake. My hands went completely numb. No normal hiker tracks you into the deep backcountry to play mind games at 1 a.m. Chris, trying to sound brave, grabbed his hunting knife and yelled toward the door, "Hey, who's out there? We have a firearm. Back off!" The moment the words left Chris's mouth, the breathing stopped. Total silence for about 5 agonizing seconds. We thought whoever it was had finally slipped away. We were wrong. Breaking the midnight silence, a voice called out from the darkness. But it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was Chris's voice. Inflection for inflection, tone for tone, the thing outside repeated Chris's exact warning back to us in a perfect, chilling playback. "Hey, who's out there? We have a firearm. Back off!" My heart stopped. I looked at Chris. In the dim red glow of the GoPro light, his face was completely bloodless. Hearing your own voice thrown back at you in the middle of a desolate forest is a type of terror you can't prepare for. The voice was human, but it was completely devoid of emotion. It sounded like a cold, mechanical recording. Then the thing let out a sound, a high-pitched, mocking giggle, like a child laughing, but deeply distorted. And then the footsteps slowly retreated back into the tree line. Needless to say, we didn't sleep a wink. We huddled together, knives drawn, waiting for dawn. At 5 a.m., the first pale light of morning broke through the trees. We tore open the tent zipper, desperate to flee. What we saw in the mud made our blood run cold. Surrounding our tent were dozens of footprints, but they weren't boot prints, they were barefoot. Someone had been walking on the frozen rocky ground with bare feet, except the toes were elongated and the heel structure was abnormally wide and deformed. The tracks led from the dense brush, circled our tent, and then marched straight toward a massive boulder 50 yards away, where the footprints abruptly ended. no return tracks, as if whatever made them had simply leapt into the air or vanished into the stone. We abandoned most of our gear, grabbed our packs, and ran. We sprinted for 2 hours straight until we finally stumbled onto the main marked trail and saw a group of day hikers.
By noon, we were at the local county sheriff's office. We spilled everything to the deputy on duty. I expected him to laugh us out of the room, but he didn't. He just sighed, leaned back, and pulled out a thick, weathered manila folder. He told us that over the last 30 years, nearly a dozen hikers had vanished without a trace in that specific sector of the ridge. The few survivors who made it out always reported the exact same anomaly, something in the woods that stalks you, watching, learning to mimic the voices of the people you love, to lure you off the path. The locals call it a skinwalker or an old mountain curse. We left Virginia that same day and never looked back. Chris wanted to destroy the GoPro footage, but the state police confiscated it as evidence. I wish the story ended there, but it didn't. 3 months after the trip, Chris showed up at my apartment in Boston. He was a shell of his former self. Heavy, dark circles under his eyes, jumpy, trembling. He sat on my couch and whispered, "It followed me back, man. Every night when the street gets quiet, I hear my own voice calling to me from the fire escape outside my bedroom window." I tried to tell him it was PTSD. I tried to tell him he was safe. The next morning, Chris was gone. The police forced entry into his apartment. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry. All his keys, his wallet, and his shoes were right by the door. But his bedroom window was wide open, and on the exterior glass of the window, 3 stories up, were muddy, barefoot smudges and deep, aggressive scratch marks. His phone was sitting on his nightstand. There was a single 4-second audio file recorded on his voice memos app at 3:14 a.m. The police played it for me during the investigation. It was Chris's voice coming from outside the window, whispering into the microphone. "Let me in, Chris. It's freezing out here." It's been 12 years. They never found his body. I've never gone back to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I never will. But sometimes, on stormy nights in the city, when the wind rattles my windows, I swear I can hear my own voice whispering back at me from the dark. The next story. Just across the Alaskan border lies Canada's Yukon territory. Anyone who has ever spent a winter up there knows that -40 degrees isn't just cold, it's lethal. It's an endless expanse of blinding white snow and black pine forests. No grid, no roads, no cell service. A lot of American hikers head up there looking for the ultimate backcountry adventure. But that kind of isolation is a double-edged sword. When the weather turns, those woods stop being a postcard and become a living hell. It was late January of 2021. I was working as a wilderness tracker for the territory's Wildlife Preservation Unit. My partner on the shift was my longtime buddy, Liam. Liam was a rugged guy from Ohio who had moved up north for the job, and he was one of the best trackers I'd ever known. Late that afternoon, a distress call came in. A group of backcountry campers had missed their check-in near Haines Junction. A massive blizzard was sweeping in fast, and we needed to check their last known coordinates before the tracks were entirely wiped out. We grabbed our gear, jumped onto our snowmobiles, and rode out into the tree line. We were deep into the timber when our snowmobiles abruptly died. The electronics just locked up. We tried to pull start them, but nothing. By then it was 5 p.m., and in a Yukon winter, that means the sun had already gone down. The blizzard hit us like a brick wall. The wind was howling so hard that the snow became a solid white sheet. You couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Liam yelled over the wind, "If we stay out in the open, hypothermia's going to take us down in 30 minutes. We need to find shelter now." We switched on our headlamps and began trudging through the drifts. After about a mile of fighting the wind, our lights caught the silhouette of a small log structure hidden behind a cluster of pines. It was an old abandoned trapper cabin. We threw our weight against the heavy wooden door, and it creaked open. We stumbled inside and slammed it shut against the storm. The cabin was tiny, just a rough-hewn wooden table, 2 broken chairs, and an old iron cot in the corner. We pulled out our flashlights and propped them up to light the room. Outside, the wind was slamming against the logs, making the whole structure shudder.
By 11 p.m., the storm was raging at its peak. We were huddled on the cot, shivering, just praying for the wind to die down. Suddenly, Liam froze. "Sean," he whispered, "look at the floor." I panned my flashlight down. A thin layer of frost and blown snow had accumulated across the floorboards near the door, and stamped clearly into that frost were fresh tracks. They started at the entrance and walked in a straight line directly toward the cot we were sitting on. But there were no return tracks leading away. Whatever had made those prints was still inside the room with us, and they weren't human. They were elongated, skeletal hand and foot impressions, like a person crawling on all fours, dragging long, jagged digits through the frost. My heart began slamming against my ribs. I turned to Liam. "We need to get out of here, right now. Let's risk the walk back to the sleds." Liam shook his head, his teeth chattering. "It's -42 out there, Sean. We won't make it 100 yards before our lungs freeze. We have to ride it out until morning." We drew our hunting knives, holding them tight. I swept my light under the cot. There was nothing there but old firewood. But suddenly, the air in the cabin grew suffocatingly heavy. A rancid copper stench began to fill the room, the unmistakable smell of rotting meat. Exactly at 12:20 a.m., something heavy slammed onto the roof directly above us. Even over the roar of the blizzard, we could hear it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound moving across the wooden shingles. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It sounded like long, overgrown talons digging into the wood. The sound moved right to the center of the roof, directly over our heads. Then a dark fluid began to drip through the cracks in the ceiling boards. I aimed my flashlight upward. Drops of thick, dark blood were splashing onto the white frost on the floor. And then a sound cut through the logs. Someone was crying right outside the cabin door. It sounded like a woman, completely helpless, sobbing in the dark. She wailed, "It's so cold out here. Please let me in. Just open the door."
Growing up, I'd heard the old native legends of the North, stories about an ancient, insatiable hunger that roams the frozen wilderness during the darkest winters, a creature the First Nations call the wendigo. They say it can mimic the voices of the lost, using your own empathy to make you open the door. I looked at Liam and panic seized me. His eyes were wide, staring blankly at the door, completely vacant, like he was being hypnotized. He stood up, muttering under his breath, "Someone's freezing out there, Sean. We have to let them in." I lunged forward and grabbed his jacket, yanking him back. "Liam, no! Listen to me! No human being can survive out there in a t-shirt, crying like that. That is not a person." But it was like he couldn't even hear me. He tore out of my grip with an unnatural strength, throwing me hard against the floorboards. He took 2 stumbling steps forward and threw the latch.
The door flew open, and the freezing gale blasted into the room. The beam of our flashlights cut through the swirling snow outside. And standing right on the threshold, framed by the whiteout, was something that defied nature. It was roughly 8 feet tall, an emaciated skeletal nightmare. Its skin was ash gray, pulled so tight over its bones that it looked like a corpse. It had no hair, its ears were pointed like animals, and its face had no lips, just a row of jagged teeth and 2 sunken, hollow eyes that caught the flashlight beam and glowed like a predator's in the dark. Liam didn't even have time to scream. A long, spindly arm shot out from the dark with impossible speed, talons wrapping around Liam's throat. With one violent jerk, the thing dragged him backward out into the blinding snow. Terror took over. I scrambled to my feet, threw myself against the door, and managed to slam it shut, throwing the bolt back into place. From the other side of the wood, I could hear Liam's choking gasps, followed by that horrific clicking laugh. I backed up into the farthest corner of the cabin, pulling my knees to my chest, clutching my knife. I wept silently in the dark. I don't know how I survived the rest of that night. For hours, things scratched at the logs outside, and a voice, using Liam's exact voice, kept whispering through the cracks. "Sean, open the door, man. It's Liam. Let me in." The next morning, a search and rescue helicopter from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police spotted the cabin. The storm had passed. They broke the door down and found me huddled in the corner, catatonic and nearly out of my mind with fear. They searched the area, but they never found Liam's body. The only thing they recovered was his winter boots, sitting in the deep snow about 50 yards from the cabin door. Next to the boots, stamped deep into the crust, were a set of massive 4-legged claw marks that led straight into the deepest part of the mountains before disappearing into the pines. The official report states that Liam suffered from paradoxical undressing due to severe hypothermia, wandered out into the storm, and was scavenged by wildlife. But I know what I saw. I resigned from the preservation unit that week and moved back to the States. I haven't slept a full night since. Whenever the winter wind rattles the windows of my house, I can still hear Liam's voice calling out to me from the cold. But I know better to look, because out there in the whiteout, nothing comes back alive. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button, leave a comment below, and don't forget to share this video.